let's see. We left off on page 99. That is correct, 99. All right, let's see. We left off, I think, on verse 26, which if you got your book, it'd be about the third paragraph down. We'll start right there. Now, we had just, right before that was remember the definition for pride, which is what we've been covering here. So verse 26, the one right underneath it, it says, I read that to you before, and I'll try to skip part of it as we have here. He says, we went through the righteousness of Job, or Eob, or Yashub, as his name is also. He was named after Yeshua, or the name that implies Yahweh will bring salvation. His name being Yashub, as it is in Eob, but it was also later as Yashub, shown in several scriptures. Now, he was the third son of Issachar. Okay, the third son of Issachar. And he says, if you look at that name closely, you'll see that it's rather like Isaac. And it has kind of the same meaning as the word Isaac, who was one of his ancestors. Now, he was the third son of Issachar. That, you find that in Genesis 46:13. Genesis 46:13 tells you that he was the third son of Issachar. And as he says, the meaning is quite like the word Isaac, okay, which is one of his ancestors. Now, the word Isaac means laughter, or to laugh in merriment, okay? Well, here's the definition here. Isaac means laugh in merriment. And in Genesis 21:6, you see where Sarah said, Yahweh has brought me laughter, and all who hear will laugh with me, okay? So, remember, having children is such a big thing with women, and especially with the women of old, because remember, that's one of the things that Yahweh said is be fruitful, multiply. And so when a woman did not have children, when she was childless, and Yahweh had shut up her womb for some reason, then she greatly rejoiced. It was a great rejoicing whenever they would have children. Now, Sarah was old, okay, and Abraham was old. And so like she says, his name would be Isaac, we'll be laughing, and others will laugh with me when they think about the fact that they knew that they were very old and beyond the years usually of childbearing. So let's see, continues on in verse 28 here. Now this is talking Issachar. Issachar was the founder of the family of the Yashubites. And you find that in Numbers 26:24. Numbers 26:24 tells you about the family of the Yashubites. He says, now there's another one of the sons of Bani, Laman in the times of Ezra. He says, I think this is probably the kin who drops off of the first one, because they often named themselves after their kinfolks. And that one came about in about 456 BY. Now, verse 29, he says, now there's a prophecy of Issachar. Okay, there's a prophecy. And this is what he says I wanted you to see. This prophecy means he will bring forth reward. Okay? And that's what the name Issachar means. Issachar means he will bring forth reward. And that's actually what he's talking about here. His name is actually a prophecy. This meaning, he says, if you get it in your mind, then you'll start seeing it in Jacob and what he and his bloodline was lined up to do. Okay, so if you think about his name means to bring forth a reward, and then like he says, when you start seeing in Jacob and his bloodline what they were lined up to do, remember that they were lined up to bring forth Yeshua, okay? And a lot of planning went into this, as you see that Yahweh worked with individuals, ever since the time of Adam. Continuing on, he says, he reads from the sources, and he will bring forth reward. He's the 9th son of Jacob and the 5th son of Leah. Now he says Leah was a very special person. The scriptures show how special she was and why Yahweh actually wanted these traits breeding in Yeshua. The breeding had to take place exactly how he had it planned, okay? The breeding for the Messiah to be born came forth only from the 12 tribes. Remember, only from the 12 tribes. Remember Moshe 3, one family only have I known, right? And one family only have I dealt with, Yahweh says. So it had to take place exactly as Yahweh had it planned. And remember that promise was given to Abraham, okay? And in Abraham, remember, he says, in your seed, all the earth will be blessed, okay? So everything had to go along exactly the way that Yahweh wanted it to take place. And that's all part of his plan. He had it planned from the beginning, and he caused it to take place. He knew the genes that he could pass on from one generation to the next. And he knew that, even though a person might not be fully righteous, he could pass on that righteous gene. And if that's passed on and someone else has righteousness in them, then of course it strengthens the gene for the next generation, and on and on and on and on. And this is all part of that breeding program that took place with Yeshua. Verse 31, he says, now remember Yachanan 1:1, this plan of life, okay, this plan of life that Yahweh carried out included Yeshua, okay, Yachanan 1:1, the plan of life. Now if you remember back here, it's on the opposite page, in verse 23, remember at the end of that paragraph, he says, pretty much across from the page down, the second to last paragraph there, he's at the very end, it says, soon, brethren, you will have authority over life itself. Remember, over the judgments, the life of the nations, and the life of the kingdoms outside of the nations and of the earth. You'll have the power over the microbes to be able to actually command them and give life, and actually to sustain that life. Because remember, you're not just going to create life, you're responsible for sustaining that life and keeping that life going, okay? So even though you may create something on one planet and you're halfway across the universe, you're still going to have to sustain that life that you created over there, okay? Because if you don't, you forget about it, it would die off, right? So this is what Yahweh does. This is the awesome power that Yahweh has. So this plan of life, okay? It's a plan of life. Because remember, the plan was in the beginning and nothing was done without that plan, and that plan was life, the life that he wanted to offer mankind. And so it includes Yeshua, the breeding program that would bring forth Yeshua. And in including the priesthood in these last days also, notice, because remember, Yeshua works with Israel, okay? And then Israel brings forth this priesthood in these last days. And nothing can alter that plan. Nothing can alter it. Remember, what is done is done. You can't alter what Yahweh has done. And Yahweh has guarded this plan completely. And nothing he says went on to alter this plan that he did not allow himself. Okay? Remember Yachanan 1 verse 3, that nothing is done without being done according to the plan. It has to be done according to the plan. And so it's complete. And only Yahweh would alter it in any way. And it was his plan, and he carried it out superbly, supremely, sufficiently, so that it would not be changed. This is the reason Yeshua taught, not my will be done, but your will be done, Father Yahweh. So that nothing would interfere with the plan itself, with the plan of Yahweh, which was perfect. It was set into action from the beginning to bring mankind to perfection, and nothing was going to alter that. And Yeshua realized that, and he was in full agreement with it. And so this is why he said, not my will be done, but your will be done. Okay? Because it can't be changed. Now in verse 32, he says, in Genesis 30, verse 18, we see how he was the 9th son of Jacob and the 5th son of Leah. This was in 1925 BY, and he was born at Padan Aram. And this is Issachar, but little is recorded of him. So he says there's not a whole bunch, but there's enough to let us know why Yahweh chose this man, and that he was a very valiant man, loyal to the cause. He knew what he was doing, and he knew this was a plan of Yahweh, and that he had a small part in it, but he fulfilled his part, even risking his life to do so. And so he was one of the ones chosen to bless all Israel at his final stance before it actually turned and went the other way. Remember, they went into God worship. They fell into God worship. But he led them up into the birth of Yeshua, and he led those descendants and he taught them. Okay, he led those descendants and he taught them. I want to show you something here because this describes his work. Deuteronomy 33, 18 to 19. And of Zebulun, Moshe said, rejoice, rejoice, Zebulun. Okay, and then he says, and you're going out. And he says, you, Issachar, rejoice in your tents. They will call the people to the mountain, and there offer sacrifices of righteousness. Of course, the mountain is the house of Yahweh. And they will offer sacrifices of righteousness. And they will feast on the abundance of the seas and the treasures hidden in the sand. Okay? So it shows you that he had a part in this work, and he took it seriously. He brought forth sacrifices of righteousness. Okay, continuing on here in this article, in this resource that he's reading from, in verse 33, he says, the tribe of Issachar, at the descent into Egypt, 4 sons are ascribed to Issachar. These sons founded the 4 chief families of the tribe. The 4 chief families of the tribe. And you see here when you turn to Genesis 46:13, he says, the sons of Issachar was Tola, Puah, Yashub, which is Eob, and Shimron. Okay, so that shows you right there that Yashub is Eob, same name. Okay, it's the same person, just a different name. Now in Numbers, he says, we see again, and in 1 Chronicles, which says the number of the fighting men when the census was taken at Sinai was 54,400, attributing now to this man and of his begettings. So the ones who followed him and his teachings, because he was a teacher, he was a priest who blessed the people and brought forth with reward. Remember, that's what his name means, to bring forth with reward to those who would follow his teaching. Okay? Now, I know that they put in here about, the rankings in the armies and so forth, but of course, Pastor shows the different way of really what this was talking about. He continues on in verse 36 here. He says, now at Sinai, it was 54,400, ranking the tribe number 5. And that's given to us in Numbers 1, verse 28 and 29. At the second sentence, the number was increased to 64,300, ranking it 3rd. Okay, so now it's the 3rd largest tribe. And that is not in Genesis 26:25. That's a typo. I don't know why that's in there, but it's not correct. Okay, continue on. He says, the position of Issachar, placed during the journey to Canaan, was on the east side of the tabernacle with his brother Yada. Notice who he is with here. And Zebulun. Okay, so he was with Yada and Zebulun. Now remember, they had the way that the camp was set up. You had the tent in the middle, and then all the way around on all 4 sides, you had the different tribes. Well, he was on the east side. There was Yada and Zebulun and Issachar. And at that time, the captain of the tribe was Nathaniel, son of Zerah. He was succeeded by Egal, the son of Yosef, who went on as one of the spies. He says, you remember all these scriptures I know? And he again, Paltiel, the son of Azan, who assisted Yeshua in apportioning the land of Canaan. Okay, so you can look these things up and you can see that who these people are. Now, the territory of the allotment of Issachar lay above that of Manasseh, or Manasseh. And that's in Joshua 19, or Yeshua 19, 27 to 33. The history of Jacob's prophecy says Issachar is a strong donkey. Okay, now that's found in Genesis 49, 14. Genesis 49, 14. That Issachar is a strong donkey. He says, I know you also heard me say that I thought the Hawkins families were like mules. The longer they went, the stronger they got. I've been like that all my life. He says, I used to own 107 rent houses. Of course, that was years ago, but from the profits of those rent houses, the land was bought on T&P. That's T&P Lane, where the press room is now. The press room was built, and this building right here was built. I think the only time I ever got audited by the IRS is when we made $93,000 one year profit from the houses, and we put it all in this building. The IRS says nobody puts all his money into his church, but that's what we used to build this building right here, And that's what we used to buy the land. And that was in 91 or 92. Somewhere around there. Now he says, in running the trailer park, the rent houses, and you see, if you remember, he had all these rent houses, and Pastor would have been a very successful businessman. Remember, he would have been one of the lords of Abelin, if that's the pathway that he would have chose, you know. But Yahweh put him there and allowed him, blessed him abundantly so that he could build this place for us to be able to come here. And this is what he used. He used everything he had and put it into the work of Yahweh. And that's, of course, like he says, IRS, they just can't possibly understand that because nobody, they don't even support their own churches, you know, let alone see someone build something. So he says, I had him all over Abelin. He says, I did all my own work at one time. He says, if you ever saw me mow the lawn, you never saw me pushing a lawnmower and walking. I always ran pushing the lawnmower. I could do it in a fifth of the time that most people took. I'm still somewhat that way, he says, but I've slowed down just a little bit. One of the boys the other day, I had to let him go to a storage building, and he's a young buck, he says, and I took off towards the storing building, and I looked back, and he was creeping along. I said, come on, and run a race with me. He was kind, and he slowed down to let me win. He says, I think he did it on purpose. But he says, I want you to get the gist of what I'm saying here. He's saying that this man is like a mule or a donkey, okay? A mule or a donkey. And this is a prophecy about this man. Not just about the man, but the work he's going to do, because he was a worker. Now, let's see, Genesis. I'm going to leave that later. He was a donkey, okay? You know, of course, the King James uses ass, but it was a donkey. You know, the donkey was a very important animal in the lives of the ancient people. Remember, the law says, do not covet. What does it say? Don't covet your neighbor's donkey, right? So that shows you the extreme importance of what this animal was when it's mentioned in the Ten Commandments. Okay, that shows you how important it is. And, you know, and even kings rode upon donkeys. It was an animal that was used throughout the empire like that because of the symbol of its strength and the steadfastness. Okay? So, he was a worker. Back in the book, he says, now notice the rest of this prophecy here. But Yaakov gave about him. Issachar is a strong donkey lying down between the sheepfolds. The King James has it this way. Issachar is a strong ass couching down between two burdens. Okay, two burdens, that's what we're going to be looking at, is the two burdens there. Okay. He says, I think we put saddlebags, that's in the book of Yahweh, but it's actually not saddlebags. He says, I think that came from the International Version or from some female who helped in translation of it, who was allowed some freedom at the time and have regretted it ever since. But it's, notice verse 43, it's sheepfold. It should be sheepfold because there's much said about this word right here. And as it says, the King James says burdens, two burdens. That word burden is number 4942, and it actually means a stall for cattle, a burden, or a sheepfold. Okay? So it actually means sheepfold. Now, he says, lying down between the sheepfolds, where he saw the resting place was righteous. Now, this is a prophecy that was given concerning this man. He says, go back to Genesis 44:14. Issachar is a strong donkey lying between the sheepfolds. Now, sheepfolds is what it should be, and I'll show you why in just a minute. When he sees how pleasing it is in the resting place, and how pleasant is his land, then he will bend his shoulder to bear a burden, and he will submit. And he says, underline or highlight this. We put forced labor. It wasn't forced labor. It was volunteered labor. Okay? Highlight that part. We put forced labor. It wasn't forced labor. It was volunteered labor. Okay? Here's the definition of the word volunteer. Volunteer is a person who donates his time and efforts or organization without being paid. Okay, that's what from yourdictionary.com. So it's a person who donates his time and his work and so forth. He really, puts the work into it from his heart. He doesn't have to get some type of payment for it. That's what a volunteer is. Okay, continue on. He said to Yahweh, "This is the way. I love it, and I want to do it." Then he bends his shoulders down and he gets the job done. That's what he's saying here. To the volunteer labor that it takes to bring forth reward, bring forth the house of Yahweh teaching, which is a great reward to anyone who will listen and hear the prophecy or take part in the work. You can't get any greater reward than that, is to be able to understand the words of Yahweh, because you have the keys of life there. You can have all the riches, but it means nothing, and it's of no benefit whatsoever, But if you have understanding and you have the words of life given to you, then you've got it all, because now you can have eternal life and you can live forever and you can have everything that you want. And that's why Yahweh made us. He made us to be able to give the entire universe over to us. Verse 45, he says, "Turn over to Yeshua's writings for this word. Highlight or underline sheepfold. It's speaking of the house of Yahweh." Okay, that's one of the vocabulary words, sheepfold. And it's speaking of the house of Yahweh. Then he goes on to Yachanah 10, verse 1. And he says, "Truly, truly, I say to you." Now notice that, when you say truly, you're speaking of the truth, and it's a big emphasis upon what's being said. But notice how Yeshua repeated it to really grab the attention of people. "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter through the door into the sheepfold," meaning the house of Yahweh, "but climbs in some other way," highlight this, "he is both a thief and a robber." We see people like this today. Continue to highlight. "This is what is called when you trespass, or when you think you're going to go ahead and sneak in Yahweh's kingdom while you trespass. Steal a man's wife, daughter, or child, as the Catholic Church does constantly, while you rape and murder." Okay, highlight all of that. So, if you enter in any other way than going through the door, that is the house of Yahweh, then you're a thief and a robber. And that's what he says. That's what you see today. The whole world is based upon this. As they have their churches and they steal Yahweh's tithe, because people go to church on Sunday to the sun god, and they give what they should be given to Yahweh's work, they give to the churches, to the gods. Continue on. He says, "Remember in Revelations 9, he said that even after 1/3 of the people were killed from the works of their own hands, their own proud minds that brought this forth." That's the whole thing, is the proud minds. They won't humble themselves to be taught and to accept Yahweh, because then they have to humble themselves. You see, you have to humble yourselves to be able to come before Yahweh and actually worship Yahweh. Was their own proud minds that they brought this forth, like we see in America today. America the proud, the beautiful. I saw "America rules" on one T-shirt on the news, he says. We're really proud of what we have done with our own hands. Okay? Now highlight this part. "Even when 1/3 part is killed over 1/4 part of the earth," Yahweh says in Revelations 9, they still won't repent of their thefts, murders, and trespassing, which lead to theft and murder. Okay, highlight that part. Even after 1/3 part is killed over 1/4 part of the earth, as Yahweh describes in Revelations 9, they're still not going to repent. Their thefts and their murders and their trespassing, which actually leads to theft and then to murder. And that's one of the simple things that's found in the 10 Commandments, But they don't even keep it. He said, "It's sad to say that people do not see it in their own lives when they're doing it. and they don't. Because you have to be able to, you have to examine yourself, right? And you have to realize that in order to examine yourself, you got to be honest with yourself, and so you have to humble yourself. And so you have to really look at yourself and to see, as the Apostle Shaul said, oh, you're a reprobate, are you living a two-faced life and so forth, And these people don't see it because they don't know how to examine themselves. They're living a life of deception. And so their minds are completely blinded to where they cannot see, they cannot make right decisions. So they try to justify themselves in doing it, and they do. The world justifies them even more than that, and they're proud of doing so. Because sin itself is justified. Righteousness is condemned. Remember the prophet said that the days would come, which is now, when sin has reached its peak, but it said that when they look at righteousness, they'll look at righteousness as being something evil. And then they'll look at evil as being righteousness, And that's why, even in the schools and stuff today, you can't push forth righteousness. You can't tell them about keeping the Sabbath, but you can tell them about Sunday, and you can tell them about Christmas and Easter and all this. You can promote anything that you want that's against the Scriptures in the churches and in the schools. And it's fine. It's acceptable. There's laws that are passed, They'll go with their quote-unquote church and state separation, when it applies to evil, but not when it applies to the rights that you have to be able to stand up and speak about righteousness. Let's see. Verse 47. He says, he bows his shoulder to bear a burden and become a slave. He says that's exactly what all the apostles said too, if you remember. Remember, they all said that they were slaves of Messiah, right? And they said, become a slave. Yahshua was the son of this hard worker. Highlight the rest of this. This mule-like person who puts his shoulders to the plow never looks back and never lets anything disturb him or alter him from doing this work. Okay, this mule-like person who puts his shoulders to the plow never looks back and never lets anything disturb him or alter him from doing this work. The mule-like person, he's not that he's stubborn-minded, but he's stubborn with determination to get the job done. And the mule is a very strong animal as well. You can it carries, I forget how much weight it carries over its own body weight. You load them things down. They carry a tremendous amount of weight. And you look at them and it's like, they're not really strong built, The legs don't really look that strong, but they can carry a tremendous amount of weight. It must be where Yahweh had designed his body to where, just like a vehicle and a trailer, how you have to distribute the weight over the axles, right? And the amount of wheels that you need on it to properly distribute, like a tank has with treads and so forth, how it distributes the weight over the earth. Well, the animal was built the same way, to where the load that's put on it is just built to where it just distributes its weight over its body. And it's tremendous the way that, and you've probably seen pictures before, with these sacks and stuff thrown on and stuff, which would knock a man down. A man couldn't even carry that amount of weight, but that donkey would carry it. So this mule-like person, he puts his shoulders to the plow, okay? And he's determined. Notice, he became determined to enter that rest. Now, Genesis 49:15, he says, when he sees how pleasing it is in his resting, and Yeshua talked about that as well. Remember in Hebrews 4, he says, turn over to Hebrews 4. The same thing is talked about in this resting. Resting is so pleasant to look upon because he could see that it could bring peace to the universe. He could see that it could bring peace to the universe. The same thing we're seeing today. Peace to mankind and peace to the universe. The ancients, they knew things because they knew, those who believed in the plan of Yahweh could see certain things. Now, they didn't understand the whole plan of Yahweh, but they could see things, and they knew that things pertain to the future. Remember, like in Psalms is written that this is for a future generation yet to be born, you know. And so they knew that the house of Yahweh would be established in the last days. And so there's certain things that they knew, bits and pieces that they had, part of the plan, and some bit of understanding here. So and that's why he says they could see that it could bring peace to the universe, and the same thing we're seeing today, peace to mankind and peace to the universe. Because remember, Psalms 8 talks about man being over the works of Yahweh's hands, over everything that Yahweh has created. He will put man over. And that, of course, is the universe, right? It includes everything that is there. He says you have to enter this. There's a way of entering into it. Now, he's talking about this rest, okay, this rest. You have to put your shoulder to the plow, as is spoken of about Issachar, where he says he put his shoulder to the plow and he would not look back. He would not look back. You remember here in Luke 9:62, Yeshua said something very simple but very profound. He says, no man who puts his hand to the plow, that is the work of Yahweh, right? He puts his hand to the work of Yahweh, and then looks back, is fit for the kingdom of Yahweh. Okay, so you can't put your hand to the plow and look back, you know, because once you start the work towards entering the kingdom of Yahweh, and then if a man puts his hand to the plow, he can't look back. You got to keep going forward, okay, because you're not fit for the kingdom of Yahweh if you take your hands off that plow and you start looking back at where you came from the world, okay, because you're plowing, trying to plow through all of this garbage that you've been taught and all this garbage that's been put into your subconscious mind all of your life. You know, you're trying to fight through all of this stuff and plow through it, so to speak, you know, because remember, there has to be that fallow ground there. It's got to be that rich soil to bring forth the seed, the plants that Yahweh is planting within us, the seeds. And of course, the seeds come into our minds through the generations, through this breeding program, because Yahweh has a breeding program that brought forth Yeshua, but he also continued that on to bring forth us in these last days, because we had this righteous seed in us. And then one day, click, it turned on, right? Yahweh turned it on. He put it within our mind for our mind to be open, and that's when we received it. And from that point on, we began to feed it and to let it grow. If you don't feed it, it won't grow. It would die, right? Also, you remember Lot's wife. Don't look back, okay? The plow, once you put your hands to the plow, don't look back. Lot's wife is a perfect example of that. You know, here she was being delivered, and she looked back, and she thought the world looked better. She wanted to stay there. She didn't really want to leave with Lot. And, of course, she lost her life. She became a pillar of real salt, right? No, not really. That's not where real salt comes from. But she became, it says that she became a pillar of salt, you know. But that's the King James Version. You know, it actually means she lost her life. She lost her protection and everything, because she looked back to the world and went back to the world. And we see what took place. Now remember, that's an example for us. That's an example. What took place in Sodom and Gomorrah, it says, is an example of what's going to take place in these last days. Okay, so back here on verse 51. Hebrews 4, he says, this, therefore, since a promise of entering into his rest, he says, this is the same thing as said where he saw how pleasant this was, that he was willing to do voluntary labor to do his work to get into that rest. Remember, we just read about that by Issachar in Genesis 49:14. Okay? So he saw this rest. He saw how pleasant it was. And so he worked hard to get it so he could enter into it. Hebrews 4:1, it says, entering his rest remains. So let us fear so that none of you come short of it. For this message was preached to us as well as to them. You see that? This is nothing new. Remember, the book of Yahweh, this message was taught to them. They just didn't have the full understanding of stuff. But they knew that the message of the kingdom was there, as well as to Issachar, okay? And by Issachar, because he was a priest who taught and blessed the people and brought forth as his name implies, okay? He brought this forth as his name implies. This message was preached to them. Because remember, when was the Sabbath created? From the very beginning, before mankind was ever made, right? And then when Yahweh made man, he brought him forth and said, here is the Sabbath. Keep it. Okay? Continue on here in Hebrews 4:1. But the word which they heard, did not benefit them. That is, some of them because they did not share in the faith of those who believed. They wouldn't have believed, and they would not humble themselves, as Yeshua said, to obey. We must be a doer, not just a hearer. We've got to do the word. We've got to be willing to do it, not just hear what is said, but actually perform what we learn in the laws of Yahweh. Continue on, he says, however, we who have believed do enter that rest. Okay, but see, it takes faith to believe. And faith is something that just seems to be empty. It's like you can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't taste it, right? But faith, as it says, and it describes it in Hebrew as being the substance of things hoped for and evidence of things not seen. And even that kind of leaves you like, huh? But when you have to really listen to it and really see what it's saying, because faith in itself is basically your religious belief, your life. You base your life upon what you believe, and you believe into life. As you practice Yahweh's laws, you are becoming like Yahweh himself. He's building that character within you to become like he is, just like he is. And that's the amazing part that just blows the mind when you think that Yahweh's making us into his image and his likeness. We can't fathom that. It's beyond our comprehension, as it says in 1 Corinthians, I think it is, where it says, it hasn't entered into our ears or entered into our mind, or we haven't seen or heard what Yahweh has in store for us. It's too much for us to be able to comprehend. But that's what he wants to give unto us. But it didn't benefit them, even though they heard it. It didn't benefit them because they would not humble themselves as a little child, like Yeshua said, to be able to hear these things. And Moshe, that's why Moshe was told, Yahweh told Moshe, he said, this is a stiff-necked and rebellious people. Don't think you can trust them, Moshe. You can't. You can't rely upon them. They're all going to die. And then the next generation will come about. And even them are not even going to be all completely faithful. There's only some of them that were. Continue on here. He says, this is Hebrews 4, verse 1. However, we who have believed do enter that rest, just like Issachar. And as he said, so I vowed in my wrath that they will not enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. We're talking about the fact that the foundation of the world. Remember, the foundation is all the plans that went into making the earth and making the system that Yahweh has in store for mankind to be made into his image and likeness. All these things were finished, and yet he said, and now, of course it says, I vowed in my wrath. Yahweh's not wrathful. That's the judgment. You remember the prophecy. The judgment of the prophecy that they would not enter into my rest. He had prophesied these things and said beforehand, look, the judgment is and the prophecy is if they're going to be stiff-necked and rebellious, which they were, and they're not going to enter into my rest. And that's the judgment, that they would not enter into his rest, because his rest is glorious, and he can't have someone in his kingdom that won't humble themselves and be obedient to his laws, because you're still going to bring forth death. Like it said, we will bring forth life. When you have power over the microbes, and they're going to be your servants. They're going to be your servants, but they're going to rely upon you to keep them alive, and that you will never steer them wrong. You will never use them in the wrong way, because remember, you'll be responsible for them, and you will be able to bring hurt and harm to them. And the whole object of being made into Yahweh's image and likeness is to guard them, to guard and keep. Remember, that's what Yahweh said in the very beginning in the Garden of Eden. He made man to guard and to keep all of these things. It wasn't that he just planted a bunch of little pretty trees and flowers and hanging fruit all over the place and let man run through it and enjoy a place. It wasn't just this garden. It was the whole plan, that life, everything that Adam saw in that garden was alive. And Adam was taught about everything that was in that garden. From the tops of the tallest trees, which he probably climbed to look to see what was up there. You know, and people do that now. Sometimes they'll climb up some of these trees in Amazon and stuff and camp out. They'll stretch out a sleeping bag area and camp out on the top of the trees. And you have everything you need up there. They said you have food and everything up there because you can eat up there from the things that grow in the trees and stuff. But Adam had all of this knowledge and understanding, even down to the lowest little creatures that lived in the ground. How much ground did Adam play with and look at and see what was in there, you know? But he couldn't see with microscopic eyes, or maybe he could because he had the subconscious at that time, but he could see and knew of, it was in his mind of what was living in that soil. The tiny little life, the microbes. You know, when we look at air, we just see nothing that's there. But there's no such thing as just nothing in empty space. Space is always being taken place somewhere. It's being occupied. You know, you get down to the tiny microscopic level into quantum mechanics and stuff. They know that an atom, as it moves around, will always constantly be finding a space to go. And so a space is always being occupied because as soon as it moves out, another one's going to take its place. So there's no such thing as empty space. But you look in the air and you think, well, it looks empty to me. No, it's transparent because you can't see it. You know, we can't see the tiny microbes that make up the firmament, which we're breathing in and is feeding our bodies right now. But it's there. You know, it's there. And then all this is this breath of life. And these are all the things that Adam knew. And man, that I just think of that Sabbath service when Adam was created. And the very next day was Sabbath, and Yahweh taught him. Man, what did he teach him? How much stuff did he comprehend and was taught that day? You know, of course, you see, as each generation has gone by, sin has reached its peak and has robbed each generation. They've been taking the knowledge and understanding away from them. We no longer know what Adam and Eve knew. If we did, we could make the earth a paradise again. But we've lost that understanding. We've lost that knowledge. We've lost that wisdom of things. But you see bits and pieces in Yahweh's law that actually tell you about it, like this keeping the sabbatical year. You know the sabbatical year, the reason behind it is to replenish the microbes so that they will work for you. You know, so you can see how Yahweh's house is getting closer to contacting the microbes and them trusting us because we keep his laws. They know that the seventh year, they'll be able to rest. Throughout all eternity, they'll be able to rest on that seventh year, and they'll be able to replenish themselves. And, you know, it's like Pastor describes, when you'll be able to see them, you'll see them enjoying themselves and playing around and enjoying themselves with their families and stuff, you know, enjoying life itself. And like it says, you know, you will have authority, you will have control over that life. And you will sustain that life. Okay, let's see. So he says, they will not enter into my rest along with the works that were finished from the foundation of the world. For he spoke in a certain place of the seventh day. In this way, and Yahweh rested on the Sabbath day. Okay, now, and that was part of the rest. Just, you know, resting on the Sabbath day, that's part of the rest. But doing Yahweh's work is what the Sabbath is all about. And it's the seventh day. It's the last day. Showing that each week as you start off, you know, like today is the first day of the week. We start off and we have the whole week to think about what Yahweh did when he was creating things. And then we rest from our labors and enter into his rest on the Sabbath day. It's not just sleeping and taking naps and things like that. It's the rest from the hustle and bustle of this pagan world that we live in. Notice it says, he rested upon the Sabbath day. And you know, and it's number 7. Number 7 means complete. Okay, it's completion. The Sabbath day is the completion of Yahweh's plan. And if you remember, that's in the Ten Commandments, right? You have the Ten Commandments in Exodus, and you have the Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, right? And I can't remember which one is which, but one of them says, you shall rest from the Sabbath day and remember that you came out of Egypt. The other one says, you shall rest on the Sabbath day and remember the creation of the world, the plan of Yahweh. So and both of them tie together for the fact that we always will remember that Yahweh took us out of sin. He took us out of Egypt so that we could enter into his rest, which he created man on the Sabbath day. For the Sabbath day. Because remember, he created it for man. Not man for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man. So he says, from all of his work in this place, they will enter into my rest. Since therefore it remains that some must enter in, and those to whom it was first preached did not enter. Okay? So he's saying that here's this plan. Some of them didn't enter. It still remains. The Sabbath day has never been done away with. It never will. But some did not enter into that rest, the ones who it was first preached to. And he says that some of them is because of their disobedience. Now highlight this part. Issachar was not disobedient. He was a very valiant man. Okay? Highlight that. Issachar was not disobedient. He was a very valiant man. Valiant. It means possessing or showing courage or determination. Okay? Possessing or showing courage or determination. Okay? You have that courage and you're determined to get something done. Okay? That's what valiant means. Okay, so this is what Issachar was. He wasn't disobedient, but he was a very valiant man. He was very determined. And notice the passage says, never once was there anything spoken of against this man that I know of in the Holy Scriptures. Yahweh testified on his behalf as he did his sons and his grandsons down through the years, which also became Yeshua's bloodline. Think about that. Yahweh testified on his behalf. Now that's what Yahweh is doing in these last days. He's testifying on our behalf, on the behalf of the house of Yahweh. Remember, the last will be first. And he testified about us since the beginning. When man fell, that's when he was told, well, in the last days, I will establish my house and salvation will be brought to the earth. Meanwhile, you'll have to struggle alone because everybody's going to follow the way of Cain, and the whole world has gone the way of Cain instead of following the way that was originally given to them. But then that's when Satan was given the opportunity to start deceiving mankind and blinding their minds so they could never, ever see the plan. And this is why you can talk to some people till they're blue in the face, and you wouldn't get anywhere with them. They would not understand and not have one bit of understanding. It has to be given to you by Yahweh. And it's given to you through those genes that are passed on. So continue on, he says, and he designates a certain day, saying in David, today after so long of a time, as it has been said, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, but go ahead and enter this rest. And that's what he wants to give unto us. He wants to give us rest. Yahweh knows what this earth offers. And it's nothing like he offers. It's nothing that he wants for us. But if you remember, the Sabbath, it says the Sabbath is for the people of Yahweh, right? It's not for the wicked. The Sabbath is only for the people of Yahweh. The Sabbath is only understood by the people of Yahweh. Even though the Sabbatarians out there, who say that they keep the Sabbath, all they know is the Sabbath is the seventh day. That's it. They don't keep the Sabbath. They don't understand what it means to keep the Sabbath. If you remember in Revelation 14:11, he says, and the smoke of their torment ascends up forever and ever. Not that they're being tormented in hell fire, but the remembrance of it. And they will have no Sabbath, notice. They have no Sabbath day or night who worship the beast and his likeness and whoever receives the mark of his name. They don't have the Sabbath. Those who worship the beast, they don't have a Sabbath day. They don't know what the Sabbath day is all about. All they know is Sunday, right? The Lord's day. And they worship their dead rabbis. instead of coming out of that stupidity that they're in. But remember, they can't see. And that's what Yeshua told his disciples, is bless your eyes, because you see these things and you understand these things. But it's not given to the rest of the world. They can't see these things. So we can't take for granted what Yahweh's given it to us. So in verse 58 here, he says, so in verse 8, Yeshua tells them to rest in obedience to the law spoken of by Yahweh in a day previously. Therefore, there remains the keeping of the Sabbath to the people of Yahweh, so they can enter this rest. That is part of entering that rest, okay? Knowing the Sabbath day and understanding what the Sabbath day is about, and then learning about how to keep the Sabbath day righteously in Yahweh's eyes. That's all part of entering into the rest. For he who has entered into his rest has also ceased from his works, as Yahweh did from his. Therefore, let us be zealous to enter into that rest. He says, and this is what Issachar saw. He saw this, and he wanted it. He desired it. He wanted to be a part of that. And remember, Issachar means he will bring great reward. Okay, he will bring forth a reward. And so, if you enter into Yahweh's rest, you cease from your own works. And this tells you right here, you cease from his works as Yahweh did from his, showing you that, of course, not like Yahweh stopped working. If Yahweh stopped working, the whole universe would disappear. It would cease to exist. But he had finished the work that he had done here on earth. And so now he had to maintain it, to keep it alive. Yahweh's constantly working. He's always working. He's always sustaining what he has created. And he's constantly experimenting and constantly creating things and seeing how things work, and coming up with new creations and so forth. Man, I just think about the the Sabbath, in the kingdom. I mean, when you come to the house of Yahweh and you keep the Sabbath, man, just think about the learning that's going to go on. It's just beyond the mind of man what we will be taught, the things that we will be taught about life. And who knows how we're going to start off on this But that's why we will need our subconscious mind to absorb all the information that we can and to be able to recall all the things that we have done in life and so forth and all the things that we've learned. You've learned things that you don't even realize that you learned about, And so your subconscious mind will be able to sort through what is beneficial and what's not and be able to use these things to be able to comprehend what's being taught. It's kind of like, I think of the kingdom as being like one big giant university, Everybody's sitting in the desk and the chair everywhere, and the professor's up there in front giving the lesson, man, of creation and so forth, explaining how these things work. You can see how you'll learn throughout all eternity. I mean, you have to know everything. You'll have to know everything about life and how to create life and how to maintain life. And we'll be constantly experimenting and learning with these things as well. Okay, Matthew 11:28 here. He says, "Come to me." This is Yeshua. He says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me." Notice, you have to learn. You have to be able to learn of Yahweh and be able to learn of Yeshua. "For I am meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Of course, Israel has done that as well. Now, underline this part. Some keep asking me, when are we going to rest? I say, first you have to come to him and take his yoke upon you by the sweat of your brow. Okay? By the sweat of your brow. Notice, work. I used to always say, hurry, work. Man, everybody should be able to see what he talks about when he taught us hurry, work, because time is passing by so fast, and there's so much work that needs to get done. He said, by the sweat of your brow. And it says, sometimes I feel like I'm sweating blood. Now, that word yoke, here's a vocabulary word, yoke. Yoke means signified bond or obligation to do some particular thing or work. So highlight that. Yoke means a signified bond or obligation to do some particular thing all work. So this is what he's saying there in Genesis 49:14. When Issachar saw this, he was willing. He said, man, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. I want it in my life. Underline this next sentence, 2 sentences. So he determined, and he stayed with that determination. He says, that, my friend, is what it takes to get into the kingdom. He was determined, and he saw with that determination. He saw it. And he says, that's what it takes to get into the kingdom. So this is what Issachar had, and that's what Yahweh wants in his people, notice. That's what Yahweh wants in his people. His sheepfold is spoken of in Yachanah 10, verse 1. And he says, we already read that where Yeshua said, either you come in the right way through the sheepfold or you're a thief and a robber. But he's reading from this source, and it says, pictured after a roofless enclosure in an open country in which flocks were herded at night as sheepfolds. Okay, so this was a roofless enclosure, but it was enclosed with a fence and so forth, and something to keep them in. And this is where you brought your sheep in. You herded them in at nighttime, so they were protected there in the sheepfold. Okay. Now, if you notice, if you have an enclosure, if there's a weak spot, and anybody wants to break out, they could always break out, and they would leave the sheepfold. And then so that they're no longer under the protection of Yahweh. At verse 64, he says, go back to Yachanah 10:16. He says, now I have other sheep which are not outside this fold. I must bring those also, and they will hear my voice. Now this is Yeshua. He says, I have other sheep which are not outside this fold, and I've got to bring them too. Let's cover this before we leave. Sheep outside the fold, okay? In Isaiah 56, verse 8, Yahweh the Father who gathers the outcast of Israel says, I gather still others to me, besides those who are gathered to me, okay? And then in Yechezkel 34, he says, in verses 11 and 12, he says, for this is what Father Yahweh says, behold, I will both search for my sheep and seek them out. Just as a shepherd seeks out his flock in the day that he is among his sheep that are scattered, so will I seek out my sheep and will deliver them out of all places where they had been scattered in the cloudy and dark day. And of course, we know that cloudy and dark day is soon going to be upon us, isn't it? So Yahweh is that shepherd. And this is what Yeshua was talking about here in Yachanah 10:16, where he says, I've got sheep that they're not outside this fold, but I've got to seek for them and get them, and they will hear my voice. And so in these last days, we hear the voice of Yahweh, and we hear these things, and we know that the house of Yahweh is the only place of protection, and we have to be able to have that understanding, but we've got to nurture that understanding, because doubt can slip in at any time. And if doubt slips in, it weakens the mind. And if you weaken a portion of the mind, then that means the rest of it can start falling down. So you got to be very careful. You got to keep in mind these things. And that's why Yahweh says, to continually rehearse these things and bring them to your remembrance, and to remember to think upon them. Because, you've got to remember these things. These things have to be in our heart. And the law of Yahweh changes our hearts and our minds. So we have to be mindful of these things always, or else we definitely will lose it, and then we'll be outside that fold. We've got to stop here. It's 8 o'clock. So let's go ahead and stand. We'll take off here on page 101 next time.